Hey, crafty friends. Thanks for joining our Boo in June creative collaboration. I'll be making a Halloween-themed breakout canvas, and it's spooktacular. I'm using a few simple supplies, a pumpkin image door hanger from the Dollar Tree. Here it is, completed for you. I'm using recycled decoupage paper, a piece of parchment paper, and an 8x10 wrapped canvas. We'll be turning it into that beautiful magic. Now, I'm going to be setting everything aside so we can dive right in. First up, flip your canvas to the back side. This is where we'll decoupage the parchment paper. So I lay it down, getting the right size to fit in, score it with my nail, and then I will just take a scissor and trim it off as close as I can. But I want to make sure it fits good inside the back of that canvas first. And then once we cut it up, we'll be good to go. Also, if you want to take a minute to subscribe to my channel for more of these great tutorials. I just love Halloween in the summer, don't you? Okay, if it's good enough. Now for the glue magic. I'm using Mod Podge, but I take my Mod Podge and I put it into a squirt bottle. It's so much easier for me to use, and I teach a lot of children's classes, and it just makes it real easy to squirt it out wherever it is needed. And let's be honest, it's so much easier to craft with a squirt bottle. So I put it on evenly, and then I just take a craft brush and I make sure that I spread it so it completely covers the canvas. Canvas tends to be a little bit more absorbing than a piece of wood or shell, something that's more solid. So just make sure you're getting into all of the edges. You don't want to forget the corners. We want that paper to stick nice and tight. If you happen to miss a spot, when the paper adheres to the canvas, it will not adhere to that spot, and therefore it will form what they call a bubble, because a bubble is filled with air and there's no Mod Podge behind it, so it's really hard to fix. And nobody wants haunted bubbles. Not at all. I'm making sure it's spread nice and evenly and getting in the corners again one more time. Now, since I will be using the iron-on method, I'm going to dry the Mod Podge completely first. Be careful. You could use a hair dryer, but if you do use a heating tool, make sure that you don't get too close because you don't want to burn your Mod Podge. Okay, so now we're putting the parchment paper over the parchment paper. Actually, the parchment sheet is the beautiful color at the bottom, but then I have parchment paper that I use to make sure that I can iron on without burning the paper. So just pressing that little craft iron easily into all of the corners and making sure that it is flat. And you'll notice that there were no wrinkles. It's perfect. Of course, I'm going to Mod Podge again on the front side because this is where we'll be putting the recycled decoupage paper. So just like before, you want to make sure that you're covering completely. I've sped this section up because no one wants to watch me Mod Podge canvas for 3 minutes. But it will take you a little bit longer. Dry it up again. Like I said, a hairdryer can be used, and if you are using a heating tool, it can get pretty hot, so be careful. All right, now my decoupage paper. I love recycled papers. I actually sell them on my Shopify site, and I have some on my Etsy shop as well. But this one's great because you've got 8 different images to use on one sheet of paper, and it just so happens to fit perfectly for this project. And I like the color scheme too. It has that parchment color to it, and it's a Halloween themed paper. So I like to make sure that there's enough to fill the page, and I'll take my scissors and just cut around, just making sure that I have enough paper to fit on my 8 by 10 canvas. Now you'll notice I'll snip it off because I like to keep everything. If I have a scrap of paper left, I will use that somewhere, somehow. Even in my kids' classes, I always let them play with all of the extra pieces off the decoupage paper. So it's a great way to recycle and not worry about throwing things away. All right, so we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to put a piece of parchment paper on top once I get it just where I want it. Oh, it's going to look so pretty. And we're going to iron on. As soon as you add the iron, you add the heat to the decoupage paper. I usually start in the center and work my way out so that I make sure there's no wrinkles. And then carefully going, of course I sped this up for you again, but I just carefully go all around the edges, making sure that they are adhered. Now they're easy to fix if they're not, but they adhered well. Now here I'm using my micro sander, and I am just taking off anything that went over the edge, which you want to happen because you would rather have more than not enough. So I gently take that off on a 45-degree angle, and that's perfect. Now here I'm taking paint, I think I used a chalk paint here, and I'm just using a color that's very similar to the background of my paper. Go around all the edges. The color is almost a perfect match. I'm going to be adding some inks afterwards because I like to dirty things up and, make sure that everything coordinates and matches, especially if it's a Halloween. We want to make sure it's got lots of boo to it. Drying up the paint edges. And now for my inks. This one is, trying to think of the actual name of it, but it has something to do, Vintage Photo. It's called Vintage Photo. And you'll notice old vintage pictures, from back in the day, as they say, they sort of have that yellowy, orangey tint to them. So they called this ink Vintage Photo. And I loved adding it to this. It gave it a little more of a vintage look, which I really love. I try to give a little bit more ink on the edges. And if you look at things that are vintage, wherever they're handled, that's where they seem to have the most wear and tear. So I like to have that authentic look and have the edges and the corners looking vintagey. Here I decided to add some black ink as well because some of the edges of the paper had some black on it. So I thought I'm going to add a little bit of black just around the edges so that it looks like a wrapped canvas and it colored all the way through. And it dirtied it up just that much more. I do hope that you'll subscribe to my channel. I love putting craft projects on YouTube. I think it's just a fun way to learn. That's how I learned a lot of my techniques. So I love to add some tips and tricks so people can, learn on their own. That's the best way. If you don't know how to do it, you look it up on YouTube. All right, so this is the $1.25 photo, and it's a door hanger. It's made out of some kind of a wood, so it was a perfect backing. Here's where I take the canvas, lay it on, and I am going to glue it on to the image. First, I start with hot glue, catching the corners, and I'll catch all the edges. Hot glue sets up real quick, so I always use hot glue to hold something in place. And then I like to use E6000 because it has a longer holding, I guess you could say. E6000 is much stronger, but the other glue dries a lot faster. So here I am placing it on top of my image. I take it off of the tray because I wanted to press it as hard as I could to get it to stick. So I use the table as a solid backing. Now it's time for the breakout. I touch up the top and at the bottom so I know where the wood is. And what I want to do is just eyeballing it top to bottom, making one slit with my box cutter. And then same thing, going to eyeball, and I'm going to go across the horizontal side. So I did the vertical and now the horizontal. And then I'm going to score again from the corner to the center. And I'll be repeating it on all corners. And as you can see, once you score them and you pull them back, voila, there's the pumpkin waiting for us under there. Now I take it's just a brush,